Chaos, cancellations, crises. Just what is going on with Catalonia's rail network. Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. I'm Lorcan Doherty and today we're talking about trains. I'm joined today by Cillian. Hello, Cillian.
Lorcan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And we're in lovely new surroundings.
Look at this. Unbelievable.
You can see if you're watching our video podcast, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and on catalannews.com.
It's amazing. Look, if you keep an eye on the details in the background, we've got Gaudí, we've got Rodalies, we've got the Sagrada Familia, Sant Jordi. Yeah, looking good. Huh?
And over here we've got Rodalies, which is topical for today because we're talking about the Rodalies network. Coming up, we'll be hearing from train drivers union leader Francisco Cárdenas and a rail expert, Joan Carlos Salmaron. But first, Cillian, Filling the Sink, our lovely logo as well, I should say. Filling the Sink has been going since October 2020, and I feel that we could have spoken about the crisis in the trains basically at any point in time.
It's a recurring topic, I think, in life in Catalonia. Certainly in our periods working with Catalan News, definitely. One thing that I was actually considering making for this episode of the podcast was a sort of an audio package of little snippets of interviews down the years. I found lots of them of interviews with frustrated commuters, and they pretty much all say the exact same thing year after year after year. It's something that we couldn't fit in, but we see the same things all the time. Delays, a lack of information when the service is disrupted as well. But we finally got around to recording this episode today.
Yeah, well, this year, of course, things have, in the last few weeks, we've had a fatal derailment here in Catalonia, and that came just 2 days after the high-speed rail disaster in Andalusia as well. So this has led to, I would say, unprecedented levels of disruption, and the entire network has been suspended at various times as well.
Yeah, and that's what's led us to record this episode today to tackle this mammoth topic, really. Just to give a bit of a recap of events, January 18th of this year, 46 people lost their lives after a high-speed train derailed in Andalusia. Just 2 days later, then here in Catalonia, a person who was training to become a train driver lost their life after a container wall fell onto the train tracks in the town of Gelida, just around 30 kilometers outside of Barcelona. Both of these were extraordinary incidents, but they both had very different causes. There was a faulty rail weld in Andalusia, and like I mentioned before, a container wall fell in Catalonia. This was exacerbated, obviously, by climate change and the extreme weather that we had at that time. But it's just kind of symptomatic, really, of the weakness of the rail network here in Catalonia, that a heavy storm, which is becoming more and more common all the time, has the capacity to lead to such devastating consequences.
Yeah, and this happened on a Rodalies line, which is operated by Renfe. We're going to hear a lot of these terms. So will we just do a quick who's who, perhaps, Cillian?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, there's a lot of these terms, words, like let's understand who exactly we're talking about. So Rodalies, this is the commuter rail network within Catalonia, surrounding Barcelona area. They're operated by a company called Renfe, and that is Spain's national rail operator. Then on the other side, there's ADIF, A-D-I-F. That's Spain's national company managing the rail infrastructure. And then there's a separate one altogether, which is FGC, which is the Ferrocarrils de la Generalitat de Catalunya. This is a different rail operator. It has a different set of lines, a different set of routes, and it is owned and operated all within Catalonia.
Yeah, and when people here complain about the rail system, which they invariably do, it tends not to be the FGC services, I would say, or, for example, the high-speed rail as well. It's Rodalies, and that was the case with the disruptions that we saw after the Gelida accident.
Yeah, absolutely. There's outrage among train drivers, commuters, and really since then, that incident in mid-January, it feels like Catalonia has just seen a succession of different reasons preventing commuters from using the train system here, be they safety inspections, strikes, other incidents happening. So just immediately after the Gelida accident, there was a total suspension of the service for a few days until the entirety of the network was inspected.
Yeah, I remember that week. I think services got back underway on the Friday, and I thought, right, here we go. And the next day, like lunchtime on Saturday, we got the news again, services disrupted again, and it was like I was actually gobsmacked. I was like, oh my god, what is happening? That's I thought the safety checks had been done. I thought everything was back up and running, and no, everything was halted again for the Saturday and Sunday, and we started again the following Monday.
Yeah, exactly. 2 weeks later, there was an incident in the ADIF control center, which caused the entirety of the network once again to be shut down. Now, this alone is not a serious issue in and of itself, but when there's no connection between the trains and the control center, for safety reasons, everything has to be shut down. And as a result, there's delays for the entire rest of the day. And of course, commuters are just aghast at all of this.
Yeah, we had a 3-day strike called in the middle of it, a Spain-wide 3-day strike. In the end, during the first day, the unions came to an agreement, an historically agreement, they called it, with the Spanish government, Spanish Transport Ministry, including higher investment in infrastructure and safety, as well as hiring additional staff. But that caused more disruption too, not just on that first day of the strike, but there was a bit of an impact even on the other days of the strike as well, even though the strike was officially called off.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that kind of aggravated commuters' anger was the fact that Gelida accident, that was a container wall that was holding up the AP7 motorway. Now, this is one of the main highways in all of Catalonia, and it goes over the Rodalies train line. Now, what happened? Part of the container wall that was supporting the motorway is what collapsed, and this caused that section of that motorway to be again closed for a few weeks while the works were ongoing to reinforce that again. So again, just if it's not the trains, commuters will then maybe be forced to drive. And then when they're forced to drive, the motorway is not even available. So it's been a bit of a chaotic month.
Yeah, we're kind of getting back to normal now, although what normal or normality is in terms of Rodalies is also up for a debate, perhaps.
It's also one of the problems.
Yeah. ADIF has said that they expect to lift around 90% of speed restrictions on Rodalies services by April. There has been a little silver lining in terms of the fact that services are free. Rodalies services are free at the minute until normality returns, whatever that means.
Yeah, I saw a really good post on Twitter about this. I sort of made the comparison of if you come home from work and if you're really, really hungry and you decided to order a pizza, and then you're told, oh, the pizza will actually be free, but the pizza will not arrive. So it's like, okay, well, you haven't paid for anything, but you're still hungry.
Well, Francisco Cárdenas is a train driver. He's the UGT union spokesperson for Renfe workers in Catalonia. And Cillian, you caught up with him this week. Let's take a listen.
I've been with Renfe for 41 years, and this is the only time we've had a complete closure of the network due to, let's say, infrastructure issues. Yes, it's fair to say this is the worst crisis in the history of Rodalies.
Francisco Cárdenas says a lack of maintenance and a lack of investment in the infrastructure have led to this point of serious deterioration of the rail network.
The rail infrastructure has deteriorated so much over time, leading to the situation we have today. Yes, problems have been exacerbated by the various storms, but the same storms passed through plenty of other places. But here is where most of the incidents and collapses of service happen.
Repairs and investments are the only way out of this crisis, according to the union leader.
At the very least, they have to invest, as was agreed in the strike resolution. They have to invest above the average to recover from so many years of lack of investment, simply to have a normal standard commuter rail network.
Cárdenas says it's gotten to the point where train drivers don't feel safe in their working environment.
We've been complaining about safety for many years now. We've had many accidents. One colleague lost her life a few years ago, and another one lost a leg when a branch fell from a tree. We have as many complaints as you want, and more. In any case, another tragedy had to occur. In this case, the one in Andalusia and the one in Gelida with fatalities, for everything that has happened to finally come to light.
He has the feeling that now, after many years of complaints and recent strikes, authorities are finally starting to listen to the train drivers.
Let's see if we can start the meetings with the authorities. With the strike organizers, we've set up meetings to monitor what was being done, especially regarding the points agreed on to end the strike. If that works, well, that will tell us that things are being done. If investment continues, we'll understand that things are being done.
Francisco Cárdenas, our thanks to him. We did, Cillian, ask Renfe and Adif if they wanted to participate in the podcast as well, but no luck there.
No, unfortunately not. Renfe told me that they're not participating in interviews of this kind. They said that they've been providing updates of the service disruptions, and given that there are multiple parties involved, they'd prefer to just continue with that approach. Adif, I thought that I might have been able to get an interview. There seemed to be a bit of a lead, there seemed to be a bit of interest, but unfortunately we haven't been able to organise that as of the moment of recording right now. So if we do manage to do that, keep an eye on Catalan News, where we'll be able to publish it as an aside.
For his part, the Spanish transport minister has had this to say.
Rodalies de Catalunya, tengo que decir, sin paliativos.
So that is Oscar Puente, Spain's transport minister, admitting in the Spanish Congress that Catalonia's commuter rail network is the most deteriorated, especially given its scale, for the lack of investments that it has received for many years.
Cillian, these issues have really come to the fore recently, as we've been discussing with the stoppages across the Rodalies network, Spain-wide strikes we mentioned, and the increased safety concerns after the fatal accidents in Andalusia and here in Catalonia. But the issues with Rodalies, they haven't sprung from nowhere this month, have they?
No, far from it, no. I mean, you said it at the top of this episode that we could have done a Rodalies episode at any point in the last 5 years of the existence of filling the sink. But, you know, it's come up now when more serious issues have taken place. But just to give a few figures, in Rodalies only, so the commuter rail network around Catalonia, that experienced more than 550 major incidents, not just any incident, a major one, between the beginning of 2021 and August 2024. Now, to splice that up differently, that's an average of a major disruption every 2.5 days, every 60 hours. And they are affecting over 10,000 commuters every time that they happen.
And these include all sorts of kind of failures in the system and things.
Yes, could be technical failures, unforeseen circumstances such as an accident, an obstructed train track. Cable theft, that's something that happens semi-regularly also. It can be just that the entire line isn't working because somebody decided to go and rob some copper wire. All sorts of different reasons to kind of disrupt the infrastructure and cause malfunctions.
Shortage of train drivers too, and also temporary speed restrictions, or so-called temporary speed restrictions, which actually remain in place for quite a long while, and that obviously causes constant knock-on delays as well. From time to time, too, Cillian, there are more serious incidents.
Of course, to give a little bit of a recent timeline, we have a bad one in December 2022. There was a train crash in Montcada that left 155 people injured. 2 fatal accidents occurred within quick succession, actually on the same line, the R4. So in February 2019, there was a fatal crash in Castellgalí. One of the train drivers was dead and several others were injured. And just a few months prior to that, in November 2018, there was a derailment in Bacarices, that's near Terrassa. And again, 1 person lost their life and 49 people were injured there.
Yeah. As well, on top of these serious incidents, it's also just the daily experience for passengers that really, I would say, leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I mean, one of the common complaints is that there's not even any information. So when the service is down, commuters aren't even told there are delays of half an hour, for example. Like we see in interviews that our colleagues in the ACN do every time that this happens, people are complaining that they're not being given any information. They'll arrive at a train station and maybe if they're lucky, one will come in 5 minutes or maybe one will come in an hour.
Yeah.
And they feel like they're being cheated. They feel like it's not being respected. They feel like they can't commute with dignity, basically.
I suppose the obvious question to ask at this point then is why?
Yeah, fair. A lack of money is the big reason, basically. A complete lack of investment over a sustained period of time. To give you an idea, between 2015 and 2022, only around 1/3 of the budgeted investments in railway companies in Catalonia were carried out. So we see this all the time in like the Spanish economy budget. They'll allocate a certain amount of money towards spending on different public services. Just because it's allocated does not mean that that investment is actually made. And over the time, only around 1/3 of what was allocated was actually spent on improving the infrastructure.
And in those years that you mentioned, so investments were planned worth 6.2 billion. in Catalonia on the trains, but actually just €2.2 billion were spent.
And that was allocated for Renfe, Adif, and the high-speed network. That's the sum of everything. And a very good point that Joan Carles Salmerón made to me in my interview, which we will hear more of in just a moment, was that since the turn of the century, there's been an imbalance of the resources allocated all within Catalonia and especially all across Spain towards the high-speed line. Now, Spain has the second longest lines of high-speed rail in the entire world, only behind China, and it's a much smaller country by land mass. So the high-speed line is getting probably a disproportionate amount of that 2.2 that was spent, all to the detriment of the Rodalies de Catalunya commuter rail network.
Well, Joan Carles Salmerón, who you mentioned, we're going to hear from now, he's the director of Cárdenas, which is a private research centre that for 40 years has been working on the study, research and dissemination of the history and technology of transport.
Joan and I started our conversation on the recent tragedy in Gelida, and the train expert offers a clear diagnosis of the accident.
The Gelida accident and everything that happened that night demonstrate two major deficiencies in the Catalan railway network. On the one hand, and most importantly, 90% of the problem is that there has been a lack of investment for decades.
The image Salmerón reaches for is a graphic one.
If we draw a parallel with a medical patient, this lack of investment has made the network like a very, very weak patient.
There are other factors at play affecting the network too.
Another cause is climate change, which is affecting us more strongly and more frequently. Storms come more regularly because of climate change, and they are affecting a rail network that is getting weaker all the time. If the rail system weren't so weak, we would not have had these effects.
Considering the constant incidents in the network, Salmerón reminds us of the separation of management responsibilities.
Most of the incidents are due to the tracks being so weak, rather than the trains running on them.
Every time there's an incident, service comes back progressively and slowly.
Precisely because of the weakness of the network. Whereas if we had a stronger network, one of the most important safety measures the control center can apply are temporary speed limitations. The speed in the relevant section of the track is reduced until the issue is resolved.
But he warns,
it's in the name, temporary speed limits, and it should be temporary. Unfortunately, in the Catalan railway network, we see time and time again these limits that should last a week, 15 days, or at most a month. Instead drag on for years, all because of the weakness of the network. This has to end, and it has to end now.
He argues that there has been an imbalance in Spain's investments in its rail network, with huge resources going to the high-speed network and Barcelona's commuter rail lines suffering in kind.
Since the turn of the century, all resources have been focused on building the high-speed network. By 2025, we have the second biggest high-speed network in the world, only after China. Almost all resources have been dedicated to building a very, very large high-speed network.
In spite of all the problems and the recent fatal accidents, he wants to send a message of calm, assuring that
today, rail transport is the safest land transport option by a significant distance.
At the same time, he also fully understands the train drivers' fury at the recent fatal accidents and fully backs their decision to not resume service until full inspections were carried out.
The train drivers were absolutely right to hold the service after a colleague lost their life. If the trains hadn't been stopped, more walls could have fallen, more trees could have fallen onto the tracks. If the service hadn't been stopped, we could have had more fatal accidents, like the one in Gelida.
The future of Catalonia's commuter rail network is set to change significantly as part of the political deal to bring control over the network to Catalan authorities, as opposed to the central Spanish government as it currently is.
Ferrocarrils inherited a railway network that was in the same state as the Rodalies network is now. And in the first few years, they carried out an emergency modernization plan, investing a lot of money and renovating the entire network. By 1985-86, when they had the network modernized, they didn't let it fall into disrepair. The maintenance investments were constant, but this doesn't cost very much money.
He believes managing the network from Catalonia will be better.
We can see in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world how service greatly improves when it is managed locally.
But he adds a warning.
In the end, it's not one transfer, but two. On one side, the transfer of the trains company, which goes very fast, and on the other side, the transfer of the infrastructure company, which goes very, very slow. Until we see the two transfers in full, we won't see great benefits.
And he finishes with a deeper reflection.
I believe that, as a society, we must defend the right to mobility, just like the right to education or healthcare. As a society, we must guarantee that in the coming years, this rail network, just like healthcare or education, has the necessary funding. Because no matter how much we start to modernize, if in the coming years there is not that constant maintenance, those constant investments will fall back into the same problems, whether there is a transfer or not.
Joan Carlos Salmeron, our thanks to him. Cillian, this being Catalonia, the issue has also drawn big protests.
Absolutely, yeah. So we had, strikes from the train drivers, of course, but also commuters took to the streets. In fact, on February 7th, shortly after all of this disruptions really kicked off, there were two protests called for the exact same day. Now, the first one had a pro-independence tint to it that was called by two pro-independence organisations, and then later a platform of commuters protested as well. Both of them drew thousands, but as ever with protests in Catalonia, there's a massive discrepancy between the numbers, between what the police give and what the organisers give. So anywhere between 3 and 40,000 went to the second one, and anywhere between 8 and 30,000 went to the first one.
Yeah, I mean, big numbers, but not quite at the same level as, say, some of the housing protests that we've seen, some of the pro-Palestine protests that we've seen. I'm just saying that to make some comparisons. And I also wonder, is it because maybe people directly in Barcelona aren't as affected because you've got the great bus system, you've got a great metro system, and even
It could be that.
the Rodalies system within Barcelona, if you go 1 or 2 stops, is where there's most frequency. No?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it could be that. Could be that maybe that the people from outside of Barcelona couldn't get a train in that day. Perhaps the service was down. Maybe it usually is.
Sabotage maybe from Rodalies and Renfe.
We jest, of course.
Yeah. Going back through the years as well, there have been some really huge protests.
Yes. 2007, there was a massive one. Interestingly, this was a time when the socialists were in power in Catalonia, just as they are right now. And the railway chaos that was unleashed after the high-speed rail was being constructed, that saw the suspension of services and widespread public discontent. Now, in that year, 200,000 people took to the streets to protest against not being able to use the trains. Now, that was under a slogan, "We are a nation and we say enough is enough. We have the right to decide on our infrastructure." And many political analysts say that that was one of the first major milestones in the independence movement that would ultimately culminate in the 2017 referendum.
Yeah, and speaking of pro-independence, we had pro-independence politician Gabriel Rufián speaking about Rodalies recently in Congress in some choice parliamentary language. Let's have a listen.
En Cataluña hay 3-4 cosas que se saben. Siempre va a haber un penalti final para Real Madrid y la cuarta es que Rodalies es una mierda.
That was Gabriel Rufián, and what he said there was, there are a few things that we know for sure in Catalonia. Real Madrid will always get a penalty in the last minute, and Rodalies is a load of shit.
Rodalies is crap, we could say, perhaps.
A bit more gentle language.
With the trains being such a political hot potato, and with Catalan and Spanish politics so reliant on deals between various parties, it's perhaps no surprise that big changes in Rodalies have formed one part of a recent key political deal, Cillian.
Yes, absolutely. So this was part of the deal between Esquerra Republicana, Gabriel Rufián's party, in fact, and the Socialists in order to re-elect Pedro Sánchez as the Prime Minister of Spain back in November 2023. Now, those parties agreed that the control of the Rodalies network would be transferred from Spain to Catalonia.
So they've created a new joint company which will be owned by the Spanish public rail operator Renfe with a 50.1% stake and the Catalan government with 49.9%. But major strategic decisions will require agreement from both sides, giving Catalonia effective influence despite that slight minority share. And the new company is going to be managed by Catalan's Oscar Playa, who's the current general director of the Barcelona Metro, and the chair is going to be Catalonia's territory minister, Silvia Panenque. Although this came from one of the pro-independence parties, Esquerra, the other major pro-independence party in Catalonia, Junts, isn't so quite convinced, Cillian.
Yes, they're quite sceptical of it all. They dismiss the joint venture as a scam. They argue that Madrid will effectively retain control of it. And they say that Oscar Puente, Spain's transport minister, will still be holding the keys to the trains. A spokesperson said that the deal completely falls short of the promised full transfer, and warning that Catalonia's stake leaves it in a permanent minority.
Well, whatever happens in the future, politicians of all stripes agree that increased investment is needed in the Rodalies network. The new company's first challenge will be the transfer of the R1 line. That's going to be the first route that it manages. And there's preparatory work underway, but it is not expected to begin operating the line until 2027. So watch this space. That's us for today. Thanks for watching and listening. Thanks again to Francisco Cárdenas and to Joan Carlos Salmeron. Thank you to you, Cillian.
Well, thanks to you, Lorcan.
And remember, you can subscribe to Filling the Sink wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to be back again next month with another episode. In the meantime, you can keep up to date with everything happening in Catalonia on catalannews.com, and do check out our social channels as well for all our video content. From me, Lorcan Doherty, and all of us here at Catalan News, take care. Bye for now. Adieu.